All right. Hope everybody is well. It is James here, and I am excited to introduce my first guest on my first podcast episode of the Roosters Crow podcast.
Hey, you remember the name?
Yes, it's so new that I'm actually had to write some stuff down here, but I'm glad to have Neil here. We actually somehow we are in the kind of same space and time in bodies, so I was excited to see him and meet him for the first time in real life. And I'll tell you what, he is a gentleman and a scholar. It is true.
Wow, that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you. I'm so happy to be episode 1.
Yes, episode 1.
Yeah, wow.
We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
So here's what I'm thinking about the podcast, right? So this idea came to me of the Rooster's Crow. And what I'm looking to do is engage with people, ideas, and culture that kind of reflect this dichotomy of the Rooster's Crow, right? It is both a warning sign and it is a call to hope, right? It signifies the calling of a new day. And there's a lot of interesting, fascinating, and compelling symbolism about the rooster, kind of in Christian mythology and across the world, actually. So that is the title, and I'm interested to see where it goes in 2021. We've got some great guests lined up, which I'll share with you guys. But I'm excited to have Neil DeGraide here. So thanks for joining me and allowing me into your beautiful part-time home.
My rental home in Florida. So you've alluded to that already. I'm from Kentucky. My family is from Kentucky, but we noticed that Florida was open and our state was locked down. So can you blame us? We had the ability. We had just finished a record.
Mm-hmm.
I had gotten ahead on my YouTube channel and a bunch of other work, and so we all just packed up and came down and rented a house down here. And we've been making the most of 2020, kind of redeeming the year.
Right. Yeah. There's ironically, right, you know about the Florida man trope. We talked about it earlier.
Yeah, Florida man. I love that little search game.
There was this radio guy. Actually, I think it was on Loveline. Remember Loveline?
Oh yeah, Adam Carolla.
Yeah, and Dr. Drew. They had this segment where they just say the craziest thing that happened in the world, and they would guess Germany or Florida. Just the strangest dichotomy there,
Yeah.
And a lot of times it was Florida, but we're having a lot of people flock to the state now because of the insanity that's happening throughout the country. And it's glad to have you here. And Florida is better off with you in here.
Well, thank you, and we get to meet in person. That's pretty cool.
Yes.
Done a lot of these via Zoom.
Me too.
And this is a delight. Feels almost normal.
No, almost. We make it feel more normal.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting how we got together, right? And what brought our bodies together was we virtually connected. And a lot of my subscribers are familiar with the Symbolic World and the Zombie Apocalypse Facebook page.
I'm glad you didn't bring up the Christian Mingle.
Yes, well, that's for episode 3 or 4. We got to break them into that one. So, Neil and I got connected through that Facebook page, and we've had some conversations, a couple on Zoom, and I really appreciate his insight, and I really got into his work and his music. And just recently, actually, and I find it, he's got a really big new fan now, and just kind of in his aside, sometimes you have plans to work out. So a lot of times I will buy clothes.
Like you're gonna work out.
Yeah, and that will get me into working out.
Oh, dude.
Right.
Here.
So when I reached out to you, I started digging into your music, and I really appreciated it, and it made me a fan. Right. So that's kind of how I got here, and I'm love to discuss some of the concepts in your music.
Awesome.
And I guess we can get into the first question here.
Well, I like to talk, so.
Yes. So let's make that happen. So just broadly, right, your band is called Dirt Poor Robins.
Yes.
So give me the why and the how of Dirt Poor Robins.
Okay, so let me give you a mini biography, and let's see how fast I can do this, because I think it's interesting. So my whole family, musicians, both sides, and also in entertainment and broadcasting. So I've been doing this throughout my life. It led me to a point where, in my early 20s, there was a musical that had come to town, and it had aspirations of going to Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
And so this musical was called Rage of the Heart. I think you might be able to find something about it online somewhere. Well, I didn't want to be in a musical. I wasn't really a musical guy. But my roommates, who were tired of driving me around everywhere, because I didn't have a car, I was so poor. Our apartment was technically a condemned space. That's how poor we were. We weren't allowed to live there. they told me they would drop me off somewhere if I went and auditioned for this big new musical. In fact, the only part left was the part of the male lead. And so I had no interest in auditioning at all, but I went, and it was a strange audition in the sense that my friends were in the room with me. Like, you never audition like this. It's just that cold table and like a camera and a recorder and a pianist. And because my friends were in the room and I didn't care about getting the part, I just went for it. So I tried to crack my friends up, and I was goofing off, and I was kind of almost singing operatically as a joke. And somehow the people casting translated that to mean comfortable on stage, confident, and they gave me the part. And so I wasn't going to take it. So the writer of the musical actually got on the phone with me, and he said, listen, I'm really pushing for you to get this part because you're a perfect fit for the girl. And so they started to describe the girl, and he's like, she's from California, or she's in Los Angeles right now. She auditioned on the West Coast, and we picked her. And as soon as I saw you, I was like, you two are going to get married. Like, you're the perfect fit. And I was like, well, maybe I could do this musical, because I didn't really have any other prospects I was interested in. So I met, and that was my wife, Kate.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how we met. It was like, we feel that was divine. I know some people are like, well, there's not just one person for anyone. It's like, I don't know how else to see it after some of that. So Kate and I met, and she was pursuing a singing career. She had a lot of major labels interested in her in LA, but for whatever reason, she had decided to come to Rhode Island and start this musical. So we met, and we eventually, her solo career, which I was helping her with, turned into a band. And that band is Dirt Poor Robins. And we formed in 2004. Okay. And we had made a CD, just like with a tiny computer and a microphone, because I had done music and arranging in my whole life and composition, but I had not done recording. And we made this record. And within a month, we had sold 2,000 copies of this piece of garbage. And, and we were getting invited everywhere to play. We were getting calls from labels. And when you make a record on your own and a CD back then, it was like $12 a pop. After, 2 months, it's like I just made all the money I needed for a year off this record we made on a computer. Maybe there's something here. Yeah. And so we started. From the very beginning, the goal of our band was, we had a very specific goal, is, I guess the shortest way to say it is, we wanted to be the soundtrack to people's lives. Meaning we wanted to have something meaningful we had to say, that it was important to us, that we could get behind. And we also wanted the songs to put a cinematic image in their head. And there's been lots of great records that I'm fans of, I'm a fan of, like Dark Side of the Moon, or Radiohead's OK Computer, some of these concept records where I was just like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to put that image in people's heads, and I want to participate in that tradition. So that's what our band has always done. Yeah,
that's very interesting. Were you musical in high school? Were you like into music? Were you
into theater? Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
So what kind of kid were you in high school?
Oh my God, I'm probably the same guy, except hopefully I'm not as big of a jerk. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? When you think about yourself in high school, and like anybody from my high school watching, I'm sorry. I was terrible. I was happy-go-lucky. Yeah. And I had become an evangelical Christian towards my later high school years, and that helped me with some of that jerkiness. Yeah. But that was pretty much it. I was straight edge. I did not do drugs. Like, I drank a couple times when I was like 15, and that was not for me. Wow. Like, I was straight edge. And I had long hair, but I was always in bands. Yeah. And I was kind of along for the ride because when I became a Christian at that time, my brother and my cousin did as well, and they kind of took over the band we were in and turned it into this really, sorry guys, but it was a weird experience for me of them going like hyper, like televangelist almost with the band, and it was really not something I was comfortable with, that I eventually pulled out of. Yeah. They meant well. It was a strange experience for me. And maybe you've seen a band like this, like the kind of band that just stops the show and like starts talking to you about Jesus. No. Oh,
not even musically, just
just talking to people and trying to get them to be into Jesus. It was very, very unusual when I look back at it now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. It seems like you and your wife met within a musical story. right? And
Yeah.
now you're trying to make musical stories to connect with people.
I don't know what else to do. I've tried to do other things. I mean, I do other things. Like, I mean, I don't define my identity solely as a musician in any capacity. It's not who I am. Like, if people don't like my music, my life isn't over.
Right.
But at the same time, I've tried to do other things, and I've tried to stop doing music. People are like, oh, you must be really passionate. It's like, I don't know. I'm compelled.
Right.
Like, I can't stop doing it. I can't stop thinking about it. As soon as I'm done with a project, the next one's there, and I just keep going. I don't seem to get this sort of writer's block or this stagnation. It's just kind of like always just bubbling in the cauldron of my mind. So I can't get away from it.
That kind of answers my question, or I can bring it up now. So what inspires you? It seems like you can't articulate it, but it drives you. What inspires you?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so when I feel like an idea is worth recording, like maybe that's the way to answer that. Would that fit? The idea is worth recording so it's funny because I'm not a very like sensitive person, but sometimes I'll hit across an idea and like something wells up where I'm emotional about it. And that's when I feel like I'm onto something. And that's what inspires me. So, I mean, I get inspired by the same things that people get excited about at movie theaters or when they read a book. It's the same kind of thing. And I guess a desire to participate in how that's helpful to people. You know, so I think that's what inspires me. I'm not very inspired if I don't imagine people getting something deep out of it either.
Gotcha.
So I have to imagine how people are going to hear when they listen, and hopefully it's a deep experience for them.
Absolutely.
It's an experience that matters.
Yeah, and your music is very deep and rich, and it's got a lot of great symphonies and melodies and harmonies, and I love the video and the graphics that go with it. It's unique. Kind of to finish off on this point, a lot of artists say that when they're really writing or they're kind of in the moment, they're not there. They're kind of channeling the ideas. Is that resonate with you, or is it more of a kind of a personal thing?
Well, so the problem I had for a while is that music was very academic for me. So I started at a young age. I was in the studio recording albums from the time I was 13. I worked very hard on understanding music theory. I wanted to be able to write for orchestras and compose, and I didn't want to be limited by my technical knowledge. So the problem is there is sort of an aspect of music where you can kind of academically get a result. And so I feel like that the first part of my music times as a music career, if I want to call it that, was academically trying to achieve a result. And I noticed a flip after a point, and where it wasn't that anymore, where I stopped thinking about the language I was using, and it became more intuitive. So that's my process now is very different than it was, because I don't ever think about music anymore. I mean, I got to the point where my mind was trained where I don't need to be in front of an instrument to write, or to write for groups, and so I can do it all in my head now. So it just, at this point, when people ask me to try to reverse engineer something for them, I wouldn't know what to tell them, and I don't know how it got there. Again, it's really weird. I'm not like one of these woohoo kind of fruity, like really open types, but I do feel like I'm having a conversation inside with one of the voices is not me, and and so I don't know what to do with it. I don't know. I can't prove it, but I feel like I'm given things and I develop them and I push them around until they feel right and they move me. And there is a type of person we've noticed that resonates with that. Yeah. So that's going good.
So I'm kind of jealous of you, right? Because I don't have a musical bone in my body, right? And you seem to have, a lot of people are musical and creative right brain type, but you seem to also be analytic, into philosophy and into a lot of kind of, intellectual pursuits, right? Would you say that you're more left brain or right brain, or would you say that you're in this kind of weird interconnected space of both sides?
So, there have been a few people in the public space that have described like temperaments and the roles that we play. Like I think Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Haidt, they've described like the types in which like, you could say it in politics, which political spectrum are you more likely to be in. So I'm very high in openness, and that generally makes you a creative person who's more interested in novelty and those types of things.
It's the big five, right?
Yeah, the big five. The big five. Some people call it ocean for the 5 letters in the word ocean. I don't think about personality much, but it was weird for me when I started learning these things because I realized that temperamentally I should be very, very far on the left. Like I fit the profile perfectly. But something was kind of making me more land in the middle. And I think part of being a creative person helped me get there and actually exercising that creativity. So if you sit in an armchair and throw out political ideas all day long, they don't get tested in the real world. As a creative person, you have all these ideas and you think they're great, and a lot of times you fall in love with them just because you made them, right? You fall in love with your own work, and so you test them out and they don't resonate with people. And you have to figure out why. You're like, oh, I thought that was awesome. And so you have to learn when you find the thing that resonates with you and resonates with an audience and what it feels like to get there. But so what happened is, I've described this way before, is that I realized as a creative type and an open type who's interested in novelty, that most of my ideas are bad. So that pulls me more into like a conservative mindset, because if someone comes along to me and is like, hey, listen, you know what I want to try? I want to put the axle of the wheel on the outside of the wheel and see how the car goes. It's like there are certain structures that within this universe only work a certain way. So there's a type of novelty that's associated with progressivism that I'm not interested in, which is the kind that just goes against the way everything works in the universe for the sake of novelty or the sake of tearing down something else. So I would describe myself as a progressive person interested in novelty and openness, but at the same time, like I've had so many failures of my novel ideas that I at some point had to realize that there were limitations to how far you could push something and it still work. So is that a good answer?
No, it's beautiful, and I see that answer. I see it reflected in your new album, Deadhorse, right? At Deadhorse 77, right?
Oh, Deadhorse 77 is the first track.
Yeah, the first
so
track. The whole album's called Deadhorse, right? Yeah. So I listened to
the deluxe edition is the one you want.
I'll tell you, check it out. I listened to it a few times, and if you're into this type of kind of thinking, I see everything that you kind of just explained reflected in the story there, and I don't want to kind of get into the story or ruin it. You know, it's this.
We can ruin it.
It's this pre and post apocalyptic graphic story set to beautiful music about kind of a love story of 2 people, Cal and Theodora, right?
Right, yeah.
Theodora means gift of God in Greek.
That's correct.
Did you intend that?
Yeah, Cal is short for Calamut, and it's I don't think it's Inuit, it's the other tribe. Sorry, there's a bunch of tribes that come to play in the story, and I don't want to botch it on your podcast, so I will not say the name. But his name also the etymology of his name has meaning to the story.
So it's set in North Alaska, right?
Yeah,
so
northern Alaska.
Point of the earth.
Yeah. Right. So let me go backwards for a second. So in 2017, we were finishing up another story I'd written called The Raven Locks, and we wrote a musical. And we didn't record it as a musical. We recorded it as if our band was going to cover a musical, so that people aren't singing in character voices. People aren't necessarily singing so every part sung by Kate is not by a girl character, for example. So we did that with The Raven Locks, and we've done some things online where we've explained the story to people because they were curious. But after we finished that, it was 2017, and I was planning a trip for our family, and we were talking about this earlier. There was a really bad red tide on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and we had already booked a home on the Gulf Coast. So when I looked into it, they were evacuating people from the beach we were supposed to stay on. Like, people weren't supposed to go on it. So I'm like, oh, this has to qualify under Airbnb's policy of, I can get out of this and get my money back. So I looked into it, and it was talking about situations like pandemics, and I really like the word, and I realized I hadn't spent much time thinking about something. Like, when something hits you and its role in the world, in the cosmos, you haven't thought about it. So I started thinking about a pandemic. Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, there was this weird revelation I had. I was like, if there was a globalist strategy to unite things, I think pandemic is how they'll do it. So, I mean, really, it's easy to say in 2020 because a lot of people believe that sort of conspiracy theory. But I started imagining how that could play forward in the future, and then I found a vehicle to tell what things might look like in the future. So our main characters start off at the edge of the world where the Alaskan pipeline begins, and through a discovery, they are actually brought farther and farther and farther into the future, and they can see the implications or the fallout of having this sort of power being pulled from the earth.
Yeah.
So the story, I mean, what was weird that happened, so the writing was pretty much done in 2019, and there's some songs I released last year, and the weirdest thing happened is that in 2020, when the album came out, and then March hit, I was like, these songs that had meaning to me in one way
Yeah.
became really literal. Like,
Yeah.
I was horrified.
Right.
That they were like, oh, this is exactly what we're going through. And for the people that were on board with us for that ride, it's been kind of neat because it's generated a lot of discussion, and hopefully we've gone into this, what 2020 is, more eyes wide open. Like
it was really uncanny listening to some of the lyrics, a couple of the songs, where it really kind of was too spot on. I was like, whoa, you kind of got this uncanny feeling. But the way you brought that up makes me think of, you know who Wyndham Lewis is?
No,
He is
I might, but I don't remember
a
names.
modernist painter, prolific modernist painter. He's been all but deleted from the internet. There's nothing on YouTube about him. He wrote several books critiquing critiquing philosophy, what he calls the time cult of philosophy. So long story short, Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian media studies star, in a sense, is who brought me to him. And this quote that he has, I just want to share it with you and see you react to it.
Okay.
Right? So,
Reaction.
so the quote is,
Neil reacts.
So the artist is engaged in writing a detailed history of the future because he's the only one who can live in the present.
Oh, wow. Yeah, only one who can live in the present is...
In terms of artists.
Yeah, if I believe that, it feels a little grandiose to my own occupation. But that's exactly what I'm trying to do at the same time, in the sense that I'm imagining the trajectory we're on, and then I'm writing mythology about where it could go. So that's all it is. I mean, it's mytholization. Mytholization, that's the word. Yeah, it's a real word. Look it up. Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do. Is so I'm trying to like meta tell these patterns without getting. I get bored with politics. Like when people are arguing why this is happening or why this is happening on a political level, I'm like really bored.
Yeah.
If you start to talk about the mythological structures or tell me a story about these battles of these ideologies or intelligences from like a narrative perspective, it makes way more sense to me and I'm way more engaged.
Yeah.
So I'm just really bored with like some of the causalities that actually make things happen. But at the same time, what was weird is like on the record, as much as I'm bored of those things and I thought I was just writing like my mythological projection, even some of the same verbiage in the songs is being used this year.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't, because I would have never done that on purpose.
Yeah.
You know, because I find it boring.
The song is filled with great kind of concepts, and there's this line, I didn't write it down, is
I bet you I remember it.
we're made of dirt and fed by stars.
Okay. Yeah.
Hit me with the, like that to me quickly it was symbolically this heaven and earth, right? Of this dichotomy. We're made of dirt. We're made of physical particles. Our bodies are actually constructed, but we're fed by stars. What do you mean by fed by stars?
Well, okay, so the full line is it's in this sort of anthemic, I guess, outro of a song called All There Is, if you want to look it up, and download it. All There Is, and it says, after all, this is who we are, made of dirt and fed by stars. In the blink of an eye, we'll be undermined when they bury our grains in the sand of time. So it's from dirt we came, from dirt you return. So the main character is hit at a very young age, very tragically, like a real moment where it just, everything feels meaningless. So there's truth in the statement, right? There's truth in the statement that is like, oh yeah, there's like, even to a materialist, which I'm not really at the end of the day, it's a fascinating thing, a point of fascination for both materialist and what do we call the opposite of materialist?
Idealist?
Idealist, of course. Idealist-like is the fact that, we're made of this stuff, and the stars, we'd all be dead without the stars in that sense, like the sun's a star. And so there's a truth to the statement, but there's a mistruth of the character where that's all we are.
Yeah.
Right, so it's just she's seeing only the material component. She's not seeing the intelligence, the consciousness, the spirit that's involved in the story. So yeah, I hit that line, and it's a really sad line for me to think about a kid thinking that way. Because I had some nihilistic moments as a kid, like when bad stuff happens. But so one of the things I try to describe to people want to know what I believe sometimes. And so we did this year, we had this little fan club that formed, and there was a couple hundred people in it. And we decided, hey, well, let's do a Zoom call with some people. So we did these Zoom calls, and everybody's first question was like, what do we believe? And it was like, oh my gosh, what a minefield, because I don't know if we can really listen to each other on this subject sometimes. So
so I just interject quickly. So I heard this quote, and we were talking earlier about Jordan Peterson says, I act. Do you believe in God, Jordan Peterson? He says, I act if God exists, right? And this quote says, if you want to know what people think, look at what they do.
They do,
right? So if people want to know what you believe, you're putting it out there, and you know what I'm saying? And
music
in a sense.
Well,
but
I mean, so I hate to answer some questions sometimes, because it's like you have to follow me around to know what I really believe about it. So people ask you questions that are just almost impossible to answer in a soundbite without someone getting the wrong idea.
Right.
But if you follow me around, you might have a totally different idea about what I was saying. So so one of the things I described to people, I said there's a way to look at the universe where people see all patterns that we observe and all categories we create, they emerge from the details, and that through evolution we've decided to categorize things a certain way for our convenience and to our benefit, and that all of these categories where we find meaning in things, they're all made up. And that the universe is really just a random place where nobody needed you here, nobody wanted you here, you weren't part of its plan, you happened. You just happened to happen. Right. So that's not me. Like I have to explain that to people right away. I don't want to believe that. I don't see the evidence for it. I see how things have coalesced in patterns. Like some of that I see as true, but not all of it. So here's how I see things. I believe that everything has meaning. That when I see another person, that they're supposed to be here. That the planet isn't overpopulated. There's not all these garbage humans in populating the planet. They all matter. That everything matters. The fact that I'm a thing that sleeps, that I'm a thing that dreams, that all the things we do, that we eat food, that like these things weren't happenstances, that they are here to teach us something about things we can't yet see. So that's where my starting point is. And I understand the appeal of the other presupposition that things are random, because the appeal to that I have to fight against every day is that, well, in any given moment you can do whatever you want. And you can use your rationale to define that as good or bad. So I can kind of I'm kind of free to do what I want to some degree. But you give up the fact that suffering can have meaning and there's something after death. And so on my side of the coin, I'm clinging to the notion that suffering has meaning, that it's all, even some things that are just so impossible to understand or get our heads around, it has purpose. And that there's more to this life than just this short time we have here.
Sure.
So I think getting back to Jordan Peterson's thing you were referencing, like I act as if God exists. I think we're all true. People who say they're nihilists are really lucky that they're still living in a body, because they don't act like things don't have meaning, or that there's not one way they ought to be and not another. So I feel like if somehow we could actually really believe in nihilism, we would just fall apart, because there would be nothing to hold us together anymore.
Sure.
So I think that, I said a lot there. That's my hot take.
I think that's a great point with looking at materialism and looking at everything from a bottom-up perspective, and then looking at a nihilist, right? If you even try to live from just a scientific materialist perspective from the bottom up, you can't, because you have to wake up and make a decision, right? And to do that, you have to kind of interact in this world where things have meaning and they matter. Even if you hate something, or you say that means nothing to me, you're applying meaning to it. Right? You can't get out of it, in a sense.
Yeah. So this is the thing. Like I have, I work with all kinds of people, and honestly, most of the musicians I end up working with around the country, or if I travel, they don't think about things the way I do, right? And so I've had a lot of like bar conversations with some really intelligent people who see things very different than I do. And one of the ways I try to find what we're really talking about, because like they hear me talking about some kind of historical thing, events and people that lived, or they hear me talking about some kind of other version, just some other brand of mythology or religion. And when I hear them talking about just the stuff, not the meaning of things. Like, yeah, sure, you can't I feel like they're using a tool. Like, let's say I have a ruler. You can't really use a ruler to measure the temperature of the air in the room, right? It's like so I feel like they're trying to use this materialistic perspective to solve things that it has nothing to do with, so that it can't solve. So I feel like I always try to start back at the beginning. It's about like, what's our presupposition? So let's talk about our presuppositions, and I can talk about why I see my presuppositions as beautiful, meaning that why it's beautiful to be embodied in a world that has meaning, and how that benefits everyone, and and how that might actually be what's happening, that things actually do have meaning. So
let me interject with a question there. I was going to ask it a little different way. So what's the relationship between consciousness and music, and what's the relationship between consciousness and meaning?
Oh my gosh, gee, that's how much.
Give me a 30-second soundbite. Go.
Well, consciousness and music, I mean, they're all. Let me just give some people some stuff to think about, maybe when they listen to music the next time. A couple of things. So there's music's all about what's explicit and what's implicit, meaning that what's just happened is setting up an expectation of what's going to happen next to you. And that's where a musician lives, and they flirt with that expectation. They satisfy and they subvert, hopefully in a way that feels like other patterns we experience. So I think that music, so you also have an idea of a tonal center, like that a music song is in a key, and that's not something that you can really see from a distance. It's something you experience, meaning that the notes are gathered in such a way that they're pointing somewhere. And music presents that better than any word I could use. Music presents certain patterns in the universe that we all see and experience that you could not stack enough words together to make sense out of. So how, the consciousness participates in music is that it's a presentation of things when it's at its best that we don't have words for that are true.
Right. Yeah, I like that. That's beautiful. There's this idea, and this kind of brought it up for me, that art in terms of sculpture is reflective of space, but art in terms of music is reflective of time. Time is something that flows through you.
Yeah.
Right. It comes and goes, and then it's gone, and it elicits an emotion, and then it's gone. But then that emotion is, if you hear a song that you heard a long time ago in a certain event, right, it evokes all of these emotions again. So it's I find music fascinating and musical people fascinating, and I'm glad that you have these thoughts and are able to articulate.
I don't make music with these thoughts in mind ever. It's like, this is all like Monday morning quarterback stuff. People ask me questions, and I feel like I'm really dishonest sometimes with my answers because I wasn't thinking about any of that when I was working on music. You're trying to, so it's funny because I do end up breaking things down later as why I thought something worked or why it didn't, but it's not how I do it at all.
Just to quickly get back into the story, right? So the story of Deadhorse, what I saw in it from listening to it and watching it is you see the kind of this dichotomy of both exaggerations of the masculine and the feminine, or the over masculine. In the first part where you have this machine that's built that ends up being kind of like this evil AI, right?
Yes,
and then it's torn down and destroyed, and then you have the feminine that becomes this kind of hyper feminine. So these two ways of overcoding existence, right? And these two ways of looking to the external to make ourselves happy, both of them lead to this exaggerated disaster, right? So I feel like it was like, I'm just trying to tell what it's it's like internally we don't look at what's happening internally. We don't look at why we're unhappy or why existence isn't meaningful to us. Let's build tools and machines that make life even easier, because that'll make us happy, when it's the exact opposite. Like you were saying, suffering is what gives life meaning. We're doing everything we can in this world and this to eliminate suffering, right? Suffering's a hard thing to talk about because it's not good, right? It's not good.
No.
But it's not, you know what I'm saying? It's not, so it's like, oh, you don't care about people suffering? No, I care deeply about people suffering, and I suffer, but to try to eliminate it, right, which is kind of reflects of what we're trying to do now with all of the stuff we're doing scientifically with genetics, and a lot of it is beautiful, but a lot of it is frightening when you look at it at this fundamental level.
I mean, you said a lot right there. Well, I think sometimes looking at suffering might be helpful to look at the negative space around it, which could be called pleasure, right? And so is all pleasure good? Is all pleasure lead to something good, right? And so if you can say no, if you can think of a type of thing you can indulge yourself, like, if a kid has had 7 cupcakes and the mother gives him an 8th, is that pleasure because he wanted it? Is that good? Was it good to? So suffering is the other way around. It's like these categories these categories can go two ways. So that's the non-duality of the categories in that sense, is that, generally people, when you're talking about masculine or feminine structures, we don't think symbolically or mythologically. We instantly filter every time we see a woman or a man on screen or in a story through politicalization of those genders. We think it's a commentary on stereotypes. And it's like, I don't think I've ever intentionally worked on a story or wrote a song that was that at all, like ever. So I think that's the most boring and most asinine way to look at men and women. Like, they're just political. It's just political commentary on these stereotypes and how stereotypes develop.
Basically, Netflix.
Yeah, but I mean, there are concrete ways. Whether we want to believe men or women are different, we all got here because we had a mom and a dad, and that mom and dad had a different role in that. And so a lot of when you're talking about symbolism, those two structures, like what makes a mom different than a dad different, goes up and down throughout this microcosm and macrocosm structure of the universe. Whether it's it's the way your mind interacts with your body, it's the way your immune system interacts with your vital organs. Like the two different roles, one like seems to be more masculine, even has led scientists to name parts of trees masculine and feminine, because those structures are seen up and down. So there is a way for masculine things to be good, and there is a way for them to be bad. The same structures, the same people acting in a very similar way can have a very different outcome and effect if it's not brought into balance with the feminine. And I don't mean masculine and like a guy being just girly enough. I'm not talking about girly and boyish. I'm talking about these things. The way the universe comes together is when these things are properly, joined. So
you don't mean boy and girl or
No.
man and woman. You mean masculine and feminine.
Masculine and
There's a
feminine,
difference.
right? And there are masculine and feminine. There are feminine structures in every body, and there are masculine structures in every body.
Right.
So people get really. This is one of those things that's like impossible to talk about because they get really confused, and they're like, you don't like Captain Marvel, and it's like you don't like Wonder Woman. It's like, what are we talking about right now? I don't care about those things really.
A lot of the critiques that we're talking about here that we're all very privy to of the patriarchy and whatnot.
Yeah.
Right. There are valid critiques of the patriarchy, and there are valid critiques of how corruption has entered the family, with divorce rates being 60-70%. And I feel like, and I resonate with what you said, because I feel like we're literally trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, hey, families are in themselves inherently bad, and we need to move to a more communal way, getting rid of the father and the mother dichotomy, and having kind of this communal way where all the roles are interchanged. Like we have the choice to pick these roles. These roles essentially pick us in a sense, right?
You do have
but
the choice.
But they've become corrupted. What do you do about the corruption?
Well, I mean, so the thing is that you do have choices. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you could be, and there's an upside and a downside to that.
Could I choose to be more caring in a sense? Like, can I choose to care more about certain things than others? Let's say my kids, I love them, but can I choose? You know what? I want to love them 50% more, and then choose and do it.
No,
you
can't. No, you'd have to build. Something would have to be built within you to do that, and something would have to change.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just done.
Yeah, no, right. It's really interesting. So, okay, so here's an idea we deal with in this. Well, actually, let me go back. So, masculine, feminine structures. Everybody's had a boss at some time in their life, generally. In general, when people say boss, we have a tendency to have more of the negative types of boss come to mind. But why do we have a critique of a negative boss? Because there is a good way for a boss to be.
Right.
And there are structures within when a boss is balanced that fit, that bring together opposites properly. And there are structures where they don't serve what's below them. They extract from it only for themselves. And so, but you have to recognize, even though boss may be seen, or like masculinity may be seen as mostly negative, that those structures, you're only looking at half of it for maybe potentially personal or political reasons, like because those other things exist, right? So here's an idea. Well, no, let me just ask another question because this might come up later. Sorry.
Sure. Well, actually, I have a question that exactly will come up a little bit later. But the idea, so let's look at it quickly. So the question I guess we'll get to here is, what does a postmodern conception of masculine and feminine look like, right? So what we were just talking about now, you can have a female boss, right, a female leader that embodies the masculine beautifully and is a great leader, right? Or you can have a male leader that embodies the masculine characteristic of leadership in his, and does a good job and takes care of his people and doesn't exploit them, right? So the idea is we've critiqued the system. The corruption has set in where there's been corruption at the highest level from all organization, political, church, family at this level. So the critique that the postmoderns leverage or levy against masculinity has led to this idea of patriarchy. When we get through this, right, and we can reassert maybe not the same roles of the masculine and feminine, but up level those roles by not degrading their roots. What would a postmodern conception of masculine and feminine look like?
Oh, gee.
Just fix relationships between men and women for us right now, real quick.
What would they look like? I mean, so you have such a varied landscape and so many types of people. I mean, if you want to get into the sociology of it, I'm not
Well, no, so internally, right, we have masculine and feminine.
Oh, yeah, no, you're right.
This is corrupt too. So
yeah.
Internally in us, what would this rectification look like?
Well, it's like how do opposite things that come together in a way that's correct, and how do opposites come together in a way that confuses? Like, okay, that might be a way to put it. So it's fun teaching your kids when you have a mind for these type of things like symbolism, because there are things that we accept in the world all the time and we never understand why these things are not as subjective as they are objective. For example, there are types of beauty, like maybe your taste in music or clothes, that are entirely subjective. But then there seems to be these sort of structures, unless you're really bent or warped, that everybody kind of objectively agrees that's beautiful. Like, if you look at a sunset, this is a real typical version, but you look at a sunset and you're outside and you're experiencing that in a beautiful place. There's nobody who's like, this is garbage.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something about when you bring the day and the night together, right, in a way, like the sunset's not good for much else really except for that beauty, because things don't really grow at sunset. There aren't things that only exist at sunset or sunrise. Like, they're beautiful. So when you go to the beach and you see a beautiful coastline, you don't find many people some people don't like sand. Like, we can get into all the exceptions to this rule, but like looking at it, you're like, this means something, right? And you're watching the proper unity, or the unification of land and sea, like these two opposites being brought together. And then the thing you start to notice if you pay attention, there's part of the beauty is irony at the point. So like, where does sand occur naturally? It occurs in a desert. Well, would you expect to find sand where there's a lot of water? And it's like, but you do, and it's like a drawn boundary. And what is the irony of climbing to the top of the mountain where the sky meets earth? Like, and why does everybody get to the top of the mountain? It's like, this means something. Right. Like, even the most nihilistic person is going to be like, this is great. Yeah. Whether they think,
absolutely.
Like, thank God I evolved this way to see this. They might have their own perspective on it.
Yeah.
And so there is, when you look at how things come together properly, without the mountain no longer being a mountain and the sky no longer being the sky, they preserve their identity. They preserve their differences. We don't try to make their differences the same thing. I know I'm talking about this in a very kind of metaphysical way, but if what you mean by postmodern, like trying to get back to and away from just reacting to stereotypes that are 150 to 300 years old, that's what has to happen, is that people have to, recognize differences and bring them together in a way that's beautiful. I mean, that's what, like, my marriage is one of the most beautiful things to me in my life. Like, sex is the union of opposites, right? It makes children. Sex that makes children is the union of opposites. There's obviously other sexual activity outside of that. Those are some of the, in body, the best things like I've experienced. So it has to be more like that. It has to be more like things have a different place. Neither is more important than the other. I mean, even if you want to get real cosmic about categories, you have light or you have the heavens and the earth. It's like light goes on forever unless it has something to strike.
Right.
Things remain in darkness and can't be observed or appreciated unless they're struck by light.
Yeah.
So the two things need each other.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to ponder the implications of that idea yourself to try to figure out, like, well, how do men and women come together in a way that doesn't have to diminish a man, or it doesn't have to unnecessarily make a woman a goddess, to come together. Like, I mean, there is a way. I can't possibly talk about all those things.
Well, you know, I asked you a question, and most of these questions I don't know the answer to, but you just articulated, I think, beautiful in this sense that beauty will save the world, right? And look what all of our movies, name a movie that doesn't have a love story.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure this out in terms of the movies are like our external consciousness, right? What's happening on the movies is coming from somewhere, and we're trying to figure out of how to fit man and woman together, or masculine and feminine together, right? But I'm glad you brought it to family, and you brought it to how you interact and the example you present for your kids and the way that you love your wife. Like, it's clear to me just visiting here for a couple hours that you have wonderful kids. Like, you know, you just get a good vibe from people, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think we can really articulate this answer of what a postmodern conception of masculine and feminine would look like, but I think it's emerging. I think it's emerging about how marriages are working out now in certain scenarios, and then families aren't being destroyed like they have been. I mean, you know, divorce, drug addiction, a lot of this is still proliferating, but there are ways, and you're seeing them emerge. And it's just a kind of a way, I think, of a lot of the leadership that's going to emerge to fix the hyper politicization of where we're in right now.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to look at the corporate or political sphere to pick the leaders that are there, and we can't really see them now, but they are emerging in different areas. And the way to be with a wife or a husband or a partner is emerging, right? So I think the new is emerging as the old still is shining. I don't even know if shining is the right word, is bringing us down to how things were.
Yeah.
So it seems like we're in this liminal space, and that's where the idea of the rooster's crow came from, right? It's this, you know, it signals the hope, but it also warns, right? It's this idea of masculinity can be, you know, cockfighting. It can be hyper territorialization, don't touch my stuff, or it can be, you know, taking care of the hen and feeding the hen, right? So this idea is that there's a positive and negative quality of both sides.
Yeah.
I guess my long point here is what we're seeing is, like, femininity is a beautiful, wonderful, unique thing, and patriarchy is a real thing that's been, you know, talked about in a terrible way, right? Because femininity can fix.
Well, for good reason, it's been talked about in a terrible way. But you know what I mean? You can't just ignore the reasons.
The thing that can fix it is now being incorporated into it and taking over it. Like, it's not like reversing oppression. It's not. We want to get rid of oppression, not reverse it. So we don't want to change the patriarchy into a matriarchy. And that's not even what I mean. Like, we don't want to make what makes the patriarchy corrupt. We don't want to bring the feminine into the corruption.
Right.
Like, oh, I want to be a CEO working 80 hours a week,
Yeah.
not caring about my family, because, you know what I'm saying? So
It
seems like that.
So it's hard. Here's my historical hot take. It's hard in the year 2000 to understand, I guess, our natural roles, the differences. And I don't mean this in like, I'm not going to talk about stereotypes here. I'll talk about how the stereotypes occur, right? So we don't understand that technology changes our bodies. Like, it's you and I inhabit a different. If we just choose to participate in the technology and the technological advances of the world, which we seem to, it changes our bodies. So we are a thing that lives longer. We are a thing that has less, infant mortality. Women have an easier capacity to control reproduction and still participate in the act a different way.
Sure.
And so we all have different bodies than where we came from. So, it's like, what's weird is what's being shunned now, because it's not as obvious because things are more peaceful. But there is an instinct in a man that is like, okay, you're let's say you're nomadic and you're traveling. I'll give you a little anecdote here. And my wife is with child and carrying child, and we encounter wolves. We don't know, like, how often in history, like, to go on to get to your point where your family has children and has children as children, that the man stood there and took it from the wolves as his wife ran for it, as she should, with the kids, because that's him too.
Yep.
And this is her too, so she's sacrificing something and he's sacrificing something to go on. And so we take that, and, like, that doesn't make any sense if you think about what it's like my life like. I mean, there's been some times where I've had to stand up to people, like, who were crazy or approaching my family in the city, but sure. We don't understand that. So what we do understand is that as modern times happened, in a lot of our literature we read and a lot of our stories we see, women, because their bodies changed through technology, were able to participate in a world that only men could for good reason, because it was like someone had to take care of, someone had the babies, men couldn't feed the babies, like it was, everybody was stuck, and men were stuck and women were stuck, right? So now we have this world where there are more options because we have these, like, in metaphysics or in Christian metaphysics, the idea of garments of skin, these things we put on ourselves to make ourselves stronger against death and give ourselves options, that the old body we lived in is starting to die and disintegrate, and some of the old ways of looking at it make less sense to people. So the idea that, like, the husband needs to be the one that does that, it just doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't mean, though, that at the end of the day, people don't want the same thing. And so what's sad is that I see a lot of women being shamed for wanting something that their grandma and their great-grandmother wanted, and is it also an indication of success is that we made grandchildren, we had generations below us and above us and below us, and we're going to go on, and our family is going to survive. And those things are being shunned, which are, of course, from whether you're a materialist evolutionary perspective or you're a Christian, make perfect sense. Like, why people want to live that way. And so it's just weird that there's this, like, abstracted, like, almost robotic way of viewing it, that hates where we came from and hates what we embody. And so I think that's a terrible idea, is that if there's freedom of choice, is that people, like, I need to stay out of other people's business and embody what I think ought to be embodied. And so part of moving in the future is not putting pressure on other people through law and whatnot to make moral decisions for them in those situations. I think that's a problem. I think that what we see right now is not answering to something that traditionally was a problem with men and women to the same degree it was over the last 300 years as we've had these technological revolutions, as our bodies change, and it's become, and the idea that a man is stronger and needs to go out and sacrifice himself in war and to wolves and to other things has become less obvious. I mean, that's my hot take on it. Like, and so I don't, but again, I don't talk about that in stories. I think that the structures are still stable. Like, the masculine structure and the difference between men and women are actually, the consistent differences are still stable. The trait differences, like, oh, you're empathetic, you're a guy, a girl in a guy's body. It's like, I don't know why empathy is, like, a guy can't be empathetic. I don't know why empathy is always positive. It's not. It's a neutral thing. A good torturer is empathetic because they understand how to hurt someone. So it's when I try to even, I get exhausted when you just try to even address it, because, like, I step out of the world I actually live in and I try to address it, and it's like, I can't change enough details in your mind to solve this. Like, you're going to have to learn to live in your own body and deal with the consequences of your own decisions. Like, so I don't know. And I just, you sound insane to people when you talk about it, or you sound sexist or something. And it's like, it's just, I don't see it that way anyway.
Well, I was just going to throw in another one of those conversation pieces that, get you into trouble. But before we get in there, so I see what you're saying reflected in the story, like, the way that humans and humanity and our bodies engage with technology. Like, it's not a overall utopian thing, but it's also not a disaster. So in the story of Deadhorse, you have technology getting out of control, right? And then you have a reaction, when they destroy the AI, right? There's this Luddite reaction to have no technology anymore, right? And you have the same consequence, right, of, there's not a balance. You have to have a balance with technology, and I would agree that our technology has kind of reached past our ability to understand it, and we have so much information and knowledge and no wisdom. So I think that has it can speak to the masculine, feminine qualities as well, kind of become hyper masculinized, and there's a lot of different ways to go, but let's get back to the...
I'm always afraid when people are listening to these type of conversations, they're like, why are they just talking about men and women? Right. It's like, no, it's symbolism. It's masculine and feminine symbolic structures. Those things exist.
You know what, let's go with some, because I don't want to ask this question here, because we don't have to get into that. But so, you and I met through, we talked about the Symbolic World Facebook page, right? Shout out to all of our friends on there. So what brought you there?
Okay, so... Symbolic World is really built off of Jonathan Peugeot's YouTube channel, and I guess so. The answer to the question would be, how did I find Jonathan Peugeot? Well, I think the first record I wrote that was really, wrote with Kate. I don't want to leave her out of it. My gosh, this will go poorly for me later.
Hyper masculine bastard.
So it was a very highly symbolic record. Not the record wasn't symbolic of something else. It was drenched in symbolism, and I wasn't even calling it that. So I just found that I thought things were more interesting when I took patterns and I gave them an intelligence. Whether it was Leviathan, to this pattern of chaos that was going to come in or destroy us if we went out too far. Other patterns where I took more typological symbolism and took like the story of Jack the Ripper, and in the song called With Slander for a Blade, I tried to explain or expose through that story how we're all like him with our words and our thoughts, you know. So
this term symbolism, real quick. So
okay.
how would you define symbolism in the terms that you're defining it as it's talked about through Jonathan Peugeot? How would you explain that to someone that's not aware of it?
Closer to his meaning of it. So there's all types of.
No, your understanding.
Okay, my understanding.
Right? If you're explaining to someone that's never heard it, right? That is your understanding of it to introduce them to it.
Yeah. So I think we're all familiar with like the symbolism in a logo, or the idea that an emblem, this represents this. Well, so when I talk about symbolism as a category, it's a way of talking about reality where you talk about it at one level that holds true on other levels. So let's just say like the proper union, like you could talk about, like I could write a song about my mind and my body, how they fight each other. My body wants things and it tries to change my rationality to get those things for it, and how my mind tries to keep my body in the right place, and how these two things go back and forth, and there's this thing in between that governs. Well, you might go up, I could write a song about that, and that song would also be true of how laws in a society function over the actual society itself and its structures, how the laws of a city govern a city. I could be talking about, we could get into biblical terms and talk about the union of the heavens and the earth, and how these two things, how principle and identity meets potentiality. So that's the other way of describing it. So I feel like what I'm doing is participating in what I'm calling symbolism when it works on multiple levels. When you could scale it up or scale it down, and it still seems to be true about how we experience the world.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, and I think that's truth has had kind of a bad rap lately. Everything is relative, right?
Oh, so, facts are where it's at.
Exactly.
Everybody has different sets of facts.
So this is a great way, the way that you just explained it, to find out if something is true, measure it against different levels of reality, right? The individual, right? The individual, the communal, the intercommunal, and the cosmic, right? If you find a category or a quality of being, of reality, that is coherent at all of these levels, you found truth. Is that, or is that not truth?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends. So, I mean, the thing is, there's no tool of measurement you can really give someone. It's this abstract thing called wisdom, and I guess it's ability to predict what has happened and why it's happened, and predict things into the future. Where we come up with a scale of how true it is, I guess, is one way to say it. There's also the idea that the God who made everything was kind and revealed some of this to us to some degree, unveiled some of it. So we, but that's a presuppositional idea. So I don't know how to tell someone when they've got a good idea or a bad idea. So how I know is I participate in a world that I've lived in, and there's a way I feel truth. There's also a way I can see over history within, a community that appears wise to me has embodied that truth. And then I test it as a predictive tool, right? So I trust things besides myself to help me understand truth, like other people who are wise, and things that have stood the test of time. So I think that, it's really a weird thing to say, because Pilate says to Jesus, "What is truth?" I mean, it's not the kind of thing you can lower and pin down necessarily. It's one of those things. I know that I'm a person as a child, because of imagination, I was prone to making up stories or changing the details in a story to benefit myself, right? I also noticed, as someone who is sensitive, that when I was honest, because I'm fortunate enough where I don't care too much what other people think or if I offend them. So I was also more free to be truthful, and I noticed the more I took that freedom, and less I used my imagination when it came to truth, right? I felt different.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, like I'm not waking up in the middle of the night, like panicked. And like, I just noticed there was a calmness that started to settle in. So that's how it's embodied for me. But like, I mean, outside of just like sort of platitudes, I wouldn't know how to tell someone when something's true or not, because you could never test it enough to know that it works always and forever.
Is there a type of truth that you can know or feel is true that is not predictive or testable?
Yeah.
Like, can you prove that you love your kids or show that you love your wife in a sense, in a scientific, materialist way? Like, hey, I love my wife 87%.
Yeah. So this is a problem we run into. So people, like, when they evaluate systems of religion or any system, is that if there's faults, it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, well, I mean, you're like not paying attention to reality, because there's no system that's it's not going to behave like a physics engine. It's like there's too many variables to know why something worked and why it didn't. Or we don't know the big picture, because you have to imagine that part of love, when you love your kids, is you do something they don't like right now and that doesn't work for them or you. They hate you for it, and they're miserable, right? And you're not happy either, but you have to do it so that in the future they will be right. So it's like we can't see far enough, I think, just as us. So there's a category called faith, right? And so it's like, what do you want me to do with faith? It's like, well, faith sees those things as true, and it gives you the ability to see that. But it's like, well, prove your faith. It's like, oh, well, I guess you can watch me my whole lifetime, and as I flounder around trying to act out this truth. There's no shortcuts. It's between, there's no shortcuts to it. So it's a pretty nuanced conversation to try to have, but I can tell you why things are wrong all the time. Like, there's lots of things that are wrong. Like, so anytime someone tries to, I guess this is the easier thing to talk about, they try to abolish a category that can't be abolished. The people do this all the time. Like, think about, we go back to postmodernism, and I think it's kind of boring to talk about, so I won't for long, but someone could say there's no absolutes, right? And we all know the logical fallacy of that statement itself, because it's an absolute statement. You didn't abolish it, you just made it bigger. Right? You made it governs over every absolute statement now with an absolution.
Right.
As opposed to statements that could be absolute or not absolute. It governs over everything. So taboo would be the same thing. It's like, there are people, like, I'm an open person. If I had a different set of circumstances in life, I might try to get rid of all taboos. I might just not like them, right? And there are people that just don't like taboos. And it's like, well, if you make taboos outlawed, you made a bigger taboo. You made the God taboo, like this mega taboo, where the taboo, which was potentially, you can argue about whether it was governing over that instance well or not, like these particular instances where it shows up, now it's on this level where it's governing over all instances, and it can't be applied at that level. It's a problem. So part of my story, and part of what I think we're seeing now, is something like this. And I call it the mega stranger. Okay, so here's my hot take through my story on what we're seeing right now, I think. So there are boundaries in the world or instances where you test to see if something is good or bad, right? So you have a joke about this, is that there's certain scientists, whenever they talk about alien life, they only imagine that alien is going to bring something good.
Right.
It won't bring a virus that kills us. They're like, it's going to be too sophisticated to do that. If they could get here, they're not going to be violent. They'll have solved conquest. And it's like, it's so like malignantly optimistic. Like, it's clearly like there's a good version of that thing coming. We have stories for both potentialities, and we better be able to imagine the thing that we don't know being bad. Like, you better be able to imagine and prepare for that, or you won't live long. Like, I've been assaulted in my lifetime by people who look totally normal, who had a totally different goal. And so it makes you ready for that. But also, you can't squash out the potential that this, like most of the people you see during the day aren't out to hurt you, in a structured society. So the problem we have is that as we've tried to only see the thing on the outside, or the thing on the margin, or the thing outside of the center as only good. Like someone who comes across, like, let's just say a border. Like, I see everybody's arguments on borders. I get why you don't want to let anyone in until you know if they have a contagion, until you know if they have a criminal record. I don't think anybody disagrees with that when you give them that instance. But there's a tendency to be too open and say those people don't exist, right?
Right.
So when you stop being able to recognize something at the small instance, you make a giant version of this. And this is what monster movies are.
Yeah.
Symbolically, this is like what horror stories are. This is where dragons come from, is that you don't deal with something at the proper level and then you get the giant version of it. So what we have now is, because maybe the proper structures aren't in place or they're being torn down, where we discover if something has a virus, where we discover if someone's a threat to us, it's being applied to every instance equally. So what we have now is the world where everyone's the dangerous stranger.
Yeah.
Like it's so obvious, and it was inevitable. And so I dealt with this idea in the story. The world sprawled out. So in my story, the world begins to sprawl out into this suburban mush. There's no city, there's no country, people don't go anywhere. The differences in people are too dangerous. The differences in personas, like even the fact that someone's politically different, is like horrible. And so this happens in this world, and there's been a series of contagions, and so everybody now is the dangerous stranger. And so I think that's what we see now, and that's what we get. And so the only way out of it is to start to reinstitute a proper door at the proper levels of things. Yeah. So we all don't end up dehumanized in the end.
That was just there's so much there. I just had a feeling of truth, and like I saw what you just said to me as like coming in a sense. Yeah. Like, just like you were writing in 2019 about what's happening now. Yeah. Just the city sprawling and this political paranoia and people like, that is a potential to happen. And I think we got to understand that, like that this is like, can happen. And I think you hit on beautifully symbolically how we can look at truth, right? How we can determine if something is optimal or ideal and whatnot, right? So and you just had so much that you brought to the table there. Like,
you want to talk for a little while
in terms of racism, right? It made me think of the idea of racism. What we resist persists, right? So this thing, if you're trying to find something everywhere, right, you don't see it anywhere, right? So this actual racism is a terrible, horrible thing, right? And we need to work through it ourselves, but to now start calling everything racist, sexist, xenophobic, right? You are actually eliminating the ability to deal with real racism, sexism, xenophobia, and then you're summoning the demon of these larger structures of division caused by calling everything that. Yeah. So when you talked about the borders, right? How can we use this symbolic thinking to ascertain truth, right? If you are an individual, you have a body, you eat food, right? Yeah. If you are a nation, symbolically, you eat people, right? The people come in and they are organized and they distribute the work in that nation, right? So
most people on your channel will understand. Well, I think they'll understand what that means. But, but eating people means like they're a resource to this.
They're coming through the border to come live in the nation, right?
And they build its body.
Exactly.
Yeah, that thing from the outside that you use to build body. Your food you take from the outside, it builds.
And that's what we do at the individual level. We do it at the national level, and we do it at the intercommunal level and the cosmic level. So the idea is that there is this structure, this micro and macrocosm structure that's distributed through all of reality at fractal levels, right? So how can you look at something like a border issue that is so contentious and so politicized? How can you look at it, okay, so what should be done? And when you said that we need to reconfigure appropriate door, right? So you're not, if you eat junk food all the time, right? If you bring into your physical body food that does not distribute appropriately, processed food, right? Your body will disintegrate, and there will be no more body. There will be no more Neil. There will be no more James, right?
No, right.
The same thing happens if you eat too pure food, right? If you eat if you're eating not a full array of foods. If you're only eating salad all the time.
Or if you ate an apple-sized object that was only vitamin C.
Yeah, that's all you ate. Right?
That would be a problem.
That wouldn't work either, right? So you have to have a diverse diet.
That's the difference between a desert and a jungle. A jungle is the thing where there's not enough structure to support life, let's say, for people. From people, it's too chaotic. And then the desert is where it's like, too much fire has been brought down and burned off everything we use to survive. So, you have to have the space in between. So when you're talking, when people talk about the Bible as like this ridiculous mythological book, I'm like, if you read Genesis and don't think about it too literally, not that it's not literal, but don't think about it too literally, you should resonate with the idea that there was, let's just say in the Garden of Eden, there was a point in your life where you ran around naked. I mean, my kids did it. Some of them did it too long. Some of them got embarrassed too early. But there's a point where you realize that you used to run around naked, and that was like, the word that Mateer uses in his book is illusory. You see that position. Like, we should all relate to that.
Yeah.
There are things that we get smart enough to realize we shouldn't do.
Right.
Or it's inappropriate or not safe. So that's something we should resonate with. Another type of thing we should resonate is like Cain and Abel. Like, if you haven't had something like Cain's feelings in your heart, or you haven't done something that seemed to be pure and then you're attacked for it, like that's a very basic level of being and a very important structure that governs human interaction. So and then the fact that in the Bible, like, what's interesting about those two characters is, like, Abel was more agrarian, right? And then Seth, who comes after him, is more like the shepherding agrarian type. And then Cain goes off and builds cities and technology. And the problem right now is you see that, like, these two things are at war, whether you wanted to call one masculine or one feminine, or you look at a electoral college map of America, and it's like the city wants to oppress the country and the country wants to oppress the city. Yeah. And so the problem is if these come together the wrong way, you get mush. But there is a way, like, so the Bible, the way it begins and ends is so interesting, because in the end, the garden that we were in the beginning of the story, the Garden of Eden, is restored, but with all the redeemed technology with it. It's like the city, and it's this gem city, this thing that's been refined under pressure over time, that God's crafting something where these two things come together that's not gross, that's not boring, that's not undefinable. It comes together where all the unity is intact, but all the multiplicity is preserved. So you have to see that in stories that, like, I say, like, as a joke, but, like, technology doesn't have to be at war with vegetables. It doesn't. Like, we don't have to. Right. This doesn't have to be our reality. We don't. It can be what we love about The Hobbit, where the Shire saves the city and the city saves the Shire. So I think that's why we love those stories. I think that's one of the big stories of mankind. And I think that we know things are not true in as much as, like, a truth leads to confusion and mush, and one leads to, like, clarity and unity. So like, there are, like, ways I believe you can test truth, and I do believe there's ways you can know something's off the table. And again, like, getting back to the idea of, like, you try to get rid of taboos, you can't. Yeah. So if you believe that's working, it's not. If you think you can get rid of the negative aspects of a stranger or the thing on the outside, you can't. If you believe it's working, look around. It's not. Like, it's not how you do it. There's a way to bring these two things together in a way that's beautiful. Yep.
So how do you know what you just articulated isn't another ideology?
You're
just saying that, hey, this is the right way to do things, right? How do you know that this isn't another ideology that's popping up that everybody else could say, oh yeah, you think that, but this is my ideology? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I know people answer that question. I just generally don't, because it's almost like you're asking me, how do I take away other people's agency? Like, you're not being that mean at all.
No, but so, how do you know, like, what you're saying?
Like, how does everybody apply this? Yeah. And it's like unless the real thing that's driving all of this is love, there's no way. So, I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't know how to tell someone to do that, because there isn't an answer I could get that would remove their agency and they would see what I say is true. Like, without something beyond me. So I don't believe I can answer that question. I just don't. Because it is, like, as far as things are on ground level, like, where you're walking around to the earth on ground level, it's just another ideology. Sure. One I find beautiful, and that if you knew me, like, I'm not someone who's so optimistic I deny the fact that there's suffering, and I don't wrestle with these things. A lot of my stories are dark, but generally, like, a really peaceable, happy person, like, joyful, like, in, like, almost like at a blissful state, like, like, some of that's innate, some of it was learned. So I don't know if someone wants that for themselves, they might want to listen. But yeah, I think that's the whole, like, the whole genie's lamp thing. It's like, how do you can't wish for someone to fall in love with you. You can't, like, I can say what I believe is true. Yeah. But I don't know how to give someone, like, some kind of empirical testing grounds to, like, because we'll never know enough. No one. Yeah. We'll never know enough. Like, there could always be the exception. There could always be the anomaly. So I don't know how else to do it.
I think, yeah, we'll wrap up here. I think we've gone for, what, about an hour?
That's how I do.
Hour and 15 minutes.
Talk.
No, but I mean, there's so many places we can go. I think, you know, you do it by example. Like, I can see it in your kids and the relationship you have with your wife here, just being here for a little bit of time.
That's really sweet.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I can feel it and see it. I think that is part of the answer, is to keep doing that and sharing it with people, and doing that in any community where you're at, if this resonates with you, and not, you know, beating over the head with anybody with all this kind of, you know, stuff that we're really into, like the analytic, symbolic part, which is very interesting for me and you, right? But when you bring it down, because I think most people would agree that we want the cities and the center of the country to cohere and to be able to get along together, right? The idea is, why don't they? And that this gets into a can of worms, right? So why is this happening? How did we get into this hyper politicization, right? It wasn't like this before. Before, if you had someone that was different from you, you disagree and you disagree to agree to disagree.
Right.
It's become so hyper partisan now that, you know, I've seen families destroyed. I've seen neighbors not able to talk with each other, and this is happening in the community throughout. So I think we need an answer here, or we're going to get to this point that you are intuiting of this decentralized, isolated, paranoid populace. You know, this sounds crazy, but no, like, this can happen. We're seeing the seeds of it now. And the answers, I think, we don't know the answers, but I think just discussing them, it's kind of, you know, we're hitting on, I think, points that may point directions or give people some insights so they can look themselves and try to kind of move that direction. Because I don't know probably the answer to any of these questions, but having a discussion, a dialogos, right? I don't know if you know John Vervaeke, right?
Yeah.
Right. So dialogos is when two people cohere, and this is one I said when I posted in the site, in the Facebook page, I said that we're going to have a embodied conversation, incarnation to incarnation.
Incarnation, right.
Which has been all but deleted.
Right.
Zoom and all this stuff.
I don't like that.
That is not a superficial happening, right?
Yeah.
Because this embodied relationship and this embodied nature is part of the solution.
Right.
So again, where do we go from here? I didn't get through Act 3 of Deadhorse, which I'm going to listen to on the way home.
You know, you guys might like it out there. If you like this guy's channel, you might like that record.
Yes, you should definitely check out, and I'm going to link to your channel as well, where you have you have a lot of commentary on the story. So Deadhorse is about an hour. How long is it? An hour and a half? Hour and 15 minutes?
It's 81 to 83 minutes long, depending on what version you have. You have it on vinyl or CD.
So it's like you have 10, 11, 12 songs, but they're all connected.
Yeah, there's 19 tracks in all.
Yeah.
And so part of the thing is that it does participate in something like a pattern of pop songwriting, like, to a degree, but at the same time, like, the whole thing was written to function more like a symphony, where you sit and you listen to it and you digest the whole thing, and then you're exhausted.
Yeah.
So it's meant to go start to finish.
Yeah.
That way. Yeah, but I mean, that's what we're doing, and we're gonna keep doing it. Working on a new one right now. So, yeah.
Nice. You got a title working for that yet?
It's called Queen of the Night. So Jonathan Peugeot, you guys know, we are talking about this tomorrow. He's helping me with the symbolism and the iconography because it's a screenplay for a movie.
Mm-hmm.
So he's helping me with some of the scene layout and some stuff. So
awesome, man. Well, I think that might be the only group we can share this conversation with. We've taken so many different.
Well, you know, it's so funny because there's places, you know, you're wrapping up, but I always want to say things that would never get me invited to certain channels. Like, I do believe things matter because there's a last judgment. We didn't even cover that subject, but like the idea that judgment ends after a point, and the difference between, like, when I'm talking about my ideology, I think it matters because I think it's the best thing I've seen and been passed down most of what I'm saying through the ages, like passed down that prepares me for that idea. Yeah. Like, so that's why I think it matters.
I asked myself that because I get into things we were talking about before, like you get into certain philosophies or, you know, religious perspectives, and you're so excited, you're like, oh, this thing is great. This thing gives a lot of answers. And then you kind of grow out of it into something new, right? So I try to ask myself now, and this is resonating highly with me. So how do I know that I'm not just stuck in another ideology? And I don't.
That's a great question.
I don't know the answer to that either, but that's why I look at the effects, like you can, by the fruits, right, as it says in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Like how your kids are doing in school, how your relationships are doing with your family and friends, and you know what I'm saying. So there's different ways, and again, it goes back to the symbolic fractal structure to see how your relationships are either thriving or not at the individual level within yourself. If you can sleep through the night, right? If your family is generally cohering,
Right.
If you're in your community and you have friends in the community that you appreciate,
Right.
at your workplace, right? So this one barometer of kind of understanding in ideology, I guess you could see if it's working out appropriately for yourself, your family, your community now, hopefully in a week from now, in a month from now, in a year from now, and if it can spread out.
Right.
Right.
I think those are good indicators, but at the same time, it's like you can't rule out that everything can go wrong, and it doesn't mean you were like. It's like.
Yeah, but you're building.
But I think those are generally like those are generally good indicators. Of
well,
if it's working.
And it doesn't have to be perfect, but you're building resilience.
Yeah.
To have this network of people you care about.
Right.
Because if you care about people that care about, if you genuinely care about people, if something shitty happens to you or your family, they will take care of you.
Yeah.
You can't fake it though. So care about people.
No, that's right. Well, you can force the government to do it for you.
Sure. Well, that sounds.
Sounds like my story.
Yeah. Right. Boom. That's a fractal in a fractal right there.
There we go. Boom. All right. This was so fun.
Yeah, man,
hopefully we can do it again
it.
someday.
Yeah, definitely. I hope you
right.
stick around here. And I think this my first guest was a great choice, and I'm glad to have an embodied conversation with you, and hope to do it again soon.
Ho, ho, ho.
Oh.
Happy Christmas.
Thanks, everybody.
Times.
See you guys. All right, I think that was good.